my name's Daisy. I'm a third-year nursing student at Ryerson, and today I will be exploring the issue of violence against women using poetry as my creative element. So the following poem is about a woman's experience with sexual assault, or many women, a form of violence against women from the perspective of the nursing profession, as well as Indigenous women, coming together to form a narrative from a social justice perspective. So first, I'm going to read the poem and provide an analysis. I will then further explore the poem using available nursing and Indigenous narrative, and then I will review my personal and professional developments regarding the issue from this new comprehensive perspective. Here's my poem. It's called Through the Clouds We See Him. Behind closed eyes I see him, liquid poured full to a glass's brim, deceit stretched far like harsh edges of a grin, my thighs laid bare as if a simple invitation. Behind closed eyes I see him. Behind closed doors I see him, a small passing moment unable to dim, an object I was, just flesh and limbs, a man in embrace with cynicism. Behind closed doors I see him. But behind closed eyes, it's myself who I see. Damaged goods, another's property. Lock in hand, yet missing the key, stuck in one moment for eternity. Behind closed eyes, it's myself who I see. It's them she sees through open eyes, not a fleeting instant, but a test through time. Colonization of lands, bodies, and minds, trapped in the soft muffle of cries. Through open eyes, she sees them. It's them she sees through open eyes, sunsets emerging without sunrise, lost women and stories swept to the side, maternal figures turned polarized. Through open eyes she sees them. But through the clouds we see them all, emerging loudly as the patriarch falls, clear as fresh water duty calls, joining together for the collective song. Through the clouds I see them all. It's called Through the Clouds We See Him as an attempt to convey the importance of collaboration in maintaining a social justice approach in regards to violence against women. Historically, Indigenous people have always been willing to join forces with settlers, so I believe that they know there's power in joining as women to hold perpetrators accountable. So the first three paragraphs are from the point of the view of the nursing profession, demonstrating how a traumatic event can haunt a young woman. Use the opening titles Behind Closed Eyes and Doors I See Him to demonstrate the nature of violence against women. They usually paint it as a one-time event that has implications on one's mental health. I also added imagery of the use of alcohol, as most nursing journals place emphasis on drinking as a risk factor. And towards the end, I switch my wording and say, behind closed doors, it's myself I see, to further elaborate on the individualistic nature of nursing's view on violence against women. It's really something that can affect anyone with lasting consequences, even though they look at it as a one-off rare event. Fourth and fifth paragraphs are from the point of view of Indigenous women. I use the wording, it's them she sees through open eyes, to demonstrate the intersectional nature of being both a woman and of Indigenous descent, as sometimes they can't escape the violence inflicted on them, and it affects them through their waking lives. I additionally use the plural them instead of him to illustrate the extent violence can go, because sometimes multiple perpetrators can affect Indigenous women across the lifespan, and sometimes they don't feel safe in urban areas nor reserves. I also use the quote, not a fleeting instant, but a test through time, colonizations of lands, bodies, and minds. Here I'm trying to demonstrate how these issues extend through Indigenous women's lives. They're all attributable to colonization of the land, our bodies, for example, through missing and murdered Aboriginal people, women, and minds, as in the erasure of their past and their heritage. I also used the quote, lost women and stories swept to the side, maternal figures turned polarized, which kind of shows how violence against women in Aboriginal communities is a consequence of previous matriarchal norms being changed, which kind of allowed women to be marginalized, killed, missing, and their general personhoods separated from them. The final paragraph narrates a restructuring of the story to support a social justice view that would also be supported by the Indigenous community. I use the words, but through the clouds we see them all, as a way to illustrate new beginnings, starting to hold men accountable, which is done by joining forces as women in collaboration. So I use the quote, emerging loudly as the patriarch falls, which kind of means that women have the ability to come together and share our experiences to bring light to the downfalls of patriarchal society. And not only would Indigenous women be able to return to their roots, but in general, women of all demographics would have the opportunity to change the systems to reduce violence against women. Finally, I say that clear as fresh water, duty calls, joining together for the collective song. And here I just wanted to narrate that something that Indigenous communities have strived for centuries, which is reconciliation between settlers for positive relationships. And I think that patriarchal makeup of our society affects all women. Unfortunately, it disproportionately affects Indigenous women, but so many of us have experienced violence solely based on these concrete gender norms and roles. And by joining our narratives, we can acknowledge that there's strength in the collective group and an opportunity to destroy toxic patriarchal behaviors. So, just for a little more context, some of the nursing narratives were most of them were quite young woman focused, which excluded other age groups, and kind of placed it in the university setting where new opportunities, partying, alcohol use could be looked at as a risk factor for violence against women, which is what I try to incorporate in the poem. It's not important to put emphasis around the events occurring in certain settings because that's kind of a way of victim blaming. So they also use a downstream approach. So they're often, the victims are left feeling badly, which I tried to show in my poem, when it should be an upstream approach, which is more fixing the problem at its root. Why do these male perpetrators feel the need to do what they do, rather than going and helping these women after the fact? It's also quite individualistic. They only looked at the context of one person rather relating it to the general problem, which I kind of narrated in the first part. Um, in terms of Indigenous narratives, it's quite different than those from nursing because um, it, the effects of colonization has shifted roles of women. Colonizers have always viewed women as inferior. They marginalized Indigenous people. Um, it put Indigenous women specifically at high risk. Um, Also paternalism, there were so many communities before that, in Indigenous communities that were maternalistic and they depended on women for guidance. They were viewed as the passageway of life through caring for children. And this shift to paternalistic society kind of erased their culture, their way of being, causing increased suffering, and it shifted the authority to males, which kind of allowed for more violence to occur. And I tried to include a little part about missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls because to me, it feels wrong that there are so many cases like this out there that happens. There's no urgency to help given the past of colonization. There's a want to erase the bloodline. Um, and that's why I kind of narrated it from a view from Indigenous women that throughout their life they feel the pain because it perpetrates them on a consistent base. So in terms of shifting our narratives, so the first one, which is individualism, which is more around the nursing narrative, it's geared at victim blaming, paternalism, and the upstream approach is kind of more what Indigenous people um, encapsulate. They look at why are these things occurring. There's a history of colonization. There's the intersectionality factor that's causing these experiences. But by putting these things together, we can kind of look at everything as we need to have some decolonization processes and more collaboration in order for us to get past these issues. And by using both these narratives, I kind of restructured my thinking in terms of professional development. I view the problem from an intersectional lens. I acknowledge that there's intersecting factors that contribute to these problems. I also would like to use an upstream approach. I would like to prevent these things from happening before they occur by looking for signs. And I want to move away from victim blaming to perpetrator blaming, trying to figure out why did men do this instead of figuring out risk factors for women. In terms of personal development, I think that there's systems that need to be in place where we can join our voices as women and advocate for the collective good rather than trying to understand why violence against women happens to one certain person. We have to switch our perspective to one that analyzes the driving forces behind the intent of male perpetrators. And I think continuing on the journey towards decolonization will give Aboriginal women the power to use their voice in addition to collaborating with other demographics of women to address the situation before more people are implicated. So, thank you so much.